The censorship thing, especially with YouTube, is a big bummer.
Are you ever kind of self-imposing any guardrails?
Disney found us to be too evil for children. Everyone I showed the video to, from my father to our management to everyone I showed it to prior to its release said, I like it, but...
Our guest today is Spencer Charnas of Ice Nine Kills. What a bloody mess this band is, and so much fun. We talked to Spencer about his childhood, discovering all of the things he loves and is passionate about, how he expresses himself as an artist, and some of the obstacles along the way, like the time Disney wouldn't let him play in their venue. Spencer, welcome. Fire with Fire. I'm your friend, Ryan J. Downey. Spencer Charnas, welcome. Happy to have you.
Thank you for having me, buddy. Always a pleasure to speak to my Ryan Downey.
Yours truly, and here in the White Void.
Yes, I
where
love
we usually
your
hang
house.
out. Yeah,
I love what you've done with the place.
it's my kitchen, ladies and gentlemen. Fun fact. I've been curious for a long time about your creative process.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually something we've never really talked about. I know that you have great collaborators that you work with, both musically and lyrically. And of course, you are a master of puns. And I always say,
master of puppets.
you are a master of puppets. You are a pastor of Muppets.
True.
And I always say you can always put a nickel in the Spencer jukebox and get an entire scene from a great movie. When you are coming up with material, whether it's visual, whether it's musical, whether it's lyrical, do you have any kind of guardrails that are sort of self-imposed? Like, are there subject matter that you won't touch, or things that are maybe even too extreme for Ice Nine Kills? We're talking a little bit about the idea of freedom of expression and feeling free to express yourself, and certainly coming up in punk and loving horror films and loving comedy, you've got that attitude, is almost inherent in everything you do. But are you ever kind of self-imposing any guardrails?
Well, when we started to do albums that had a theme, the first one being Every Trick in the Book, where it was literature, and then the 2 Silver Scream records we put out, people began asking, you should do this theme, or you should do maybe an album that's all on video games, or album blah blah blah. And then one that came up from time to time is, would you ever tackle real life crimes and real life murders? And that's one thing I would stay away from, because I don't think at the end of the day that's fun. And that's what Ice Nine Kills is really all about. It's fun to make these songs about these movies that I love. It's fun to make these videos, because I feel
fictitious victims.
Fictitious, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's really nothing too fun about the real murders. We like to stick to the on-screen gore. So that's the one thing that I don't think would be, for me, right of us to do.
I love that, and I don't disagree. In fact, I think, as we were talking about earlier, the escapism's part of it, right? Because these aren't real-world grisly killings. These are fantastical, fun killings.
Fun killings, yeah.
Yeah, nice shenanigans.
Comedic, yeah. Evil shenanigans.
Not evil shenanigans. And that's such a great point. So when you're putting this stuff together and you have kind of the theme in mind, because you mentioned Every Trick in the Book, and you've talked about how your sister Jocelyn suggested the name Ice Nine. She's well read and knew that came from Kurt Vonnegut. Was she suggesting books to you? Where did your book list come from?
She always encouraged me to read. I can read, which is a surprise to a lot of people.
Is this an exclusive?
This is an exclusive. I think actually it really goes back to film, because I definitely saw the movie American Psycho before I was even aware that there was a book. So then to go, see that film, be riveted by it, and then go back and read the Bret Easton Ellis novel. And I think that happened with a lot of stuff.
And to find out that's a shared universe even.
Right.
Yeah.
And Stephen King, I definitely saw those movies. I was aware that Stephen King was an author, but I definitely saw all those films before I went back and read the books. And I always felt excited to do so, because to see the differences, everything from, Paul Allen is Paul Owen in the American Psycho novel, and there's more detail involved in the killing, and obviously it's not the exact same turn of events. So I found that exciting to be obsessed with a movie and be like, oh wait, there's another version of it. And in a way, that's what Ice Nine Kills does. You know, we take these things that are unbelievable pieces of art, whether they're literature or movies, and we try to put our own spin on it. And one of the most exciting things for me is when I constantly hear, you know, meet and greets at conventions that people got into a certain movie or even got into horror or liked metal but didn't like horror, or vice versa, and that we were sort of their gateway into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, arguably my favorite thing about your band is I remember at the first Silver Scream convention where you were kind enough to invite me to host your panels in the panel room. At the very first panel on the first day, I asked the audience, hey, I know everybody in here is an Ice Nine Kills fan, you love metal, you love horror films. Who here is at your first horror convention? And it was every hand in that room went, whoosh, and you could see it. So I proceeded to ask that during every panel all week long. Same situation. And you could see whether it's like, you know, Kane Hodder, who played Jason in several Friday the 13th movies. He does horror conventions all the time. A lot of times that horror audience is a group of people, God bless them, who have heard Kane's stories, and know every intimate detail of every single thing. And you could kind of see a lot of the talent, so to speak, the luminaries from the horror world kind of perk up when they go, oh, this is a packed room full of enthusiastic, excited horror fans who have never been to one of these and have never seen any of this assemblage of people on stage. And yeah, it's really remarkable, man, because it's all your band is bringing those people there and creating that space for them.
I love to hear that, and I love that we can be that entry point to the genre or the entry point to the convention world, because one of the things that I love about doing these conventions and just the whole idea of these cons is that I feel like it rights the ship, right? Because so many of these actors are so talented, so underrated, and you know, when you're a young actor and you get a call to be in a film, you have no idea if it's going to be a hit. Most likely not, right?
Maybe if you're the kid in Pet Sematary,
right? Gage and Miko Hughes. You know, so few films come out and turn a profit, let alone be something that people care about for 50 years. And when you're a young actor in Hollywood and you get a break, you know, to be in a movie like Scream, you know, those actors, when they did that movie, they made scale. I think, you know, maybe the stars of that movie made 20 grand or something. You know, this is a franchise that has grossed, you know, probably almost $1 billion at this point.
And again, people forget that was a cast of relative unknowns.
Yeah,
other than Drew
at the
Barrymore.
time, other than Courtney Cox and Drew Barrymore. So to be at these conventions and see, you know, Skeet and Matt Lillard and Nev and Jamie Kennedy, just having these lines, you know, out the door into the street, and meeting these fans that really appreciate their work, and at the same time, you know, being able to make a living from these cons with these generous fans that pay to take pictures and speak to their favorite actors. It's a nice way of them finally getting the due that they've always deserved.
Yeah, a whole self-sustaining ecosystem, which again is very much like punk rock. You know, a lot of bands that would have never had a shot in the mainstream avenues of creating, performing, and releasing music just built their own community to do it. And here we have even some actors who maybe haven't booked an acting gig in a couple of decades are able to make a living, and more importantly, feel that passion and that love and that energy for the work that they have done that you know, otherwise might have felt like it was in a vacuum. It's
Absolutely.
Really great. And for all that inspiration to have been poured into the art you're making, and for that to then create a bigger space to literally reciprocate, it's just, it's awe-inspiring.
And I think it also, you know, when stuff happens at these conventions, like, you know, we were talking about, you know, Matt Lillard or Skeet, I think the word sort of goes around in the film industry, like, these guys are absolutely drawing, 10,000 people to these conventions that are lining up for, 10 hours to meet them. I think that gets around, and I've seen. I think that's paying off in again those great actors getting the due that they're deserved in terms of great gigs. And Lillard, I think, just booked a Marvel movie, and all these sort of high-profile gigs are coming their way because I think the con world, the film industry has their ear to the street on those kind of things. So I think it just works in such a lovely way for everybody.
Everyone knows you as the horror guy, and certainly as a fellow horror person, we'll be talking about horror today. But I really want to talk about punk rock, because I think kind of a lesser heralded Spencer Charnas fact, we think of you as the leader of one of the biggest metalcore, heavy, extreme bands around, but you're a punk kid. You were like an Epitaph, Fat Records, old school Warped Tour. That was your shit from the beginning. Tell me about how you first discovered that and how that part of your journey figures into where you ended up.
Absolutely. Ever since probably the 4th or 5th grade, I've been obsessed with punk music. Probably my gateway to punk was probably the Epitaph Records samplers. They would always
give them the boot.
Yeah, exactly. And that was probably the first any kind of experience I had with samplers where you get a taste of all these bands that you maybe have never heard of. And from that, I fell in love with bands like NoFX and Bad Religion, and then sort of did a little bit more of a deeper dive into the Southern California scene. Goldfinger, it's no secret that Goldfinger is one of my favorite punk bands ever. Actually, one of the reasons that we formed Ice Nine Kills was because of a Goldfinger show that I attended at the Palladium in 2000. And I actually have a tattoo of that date behind my left ear. And I've just been sort of enamored with it. Real Big Fish, Less Than Jake, all those kind of bands from that era. And we've been lucky enough to collaborate with some of them. Less Than Jake has played on one of our records, Real Big Fish, the horn section, and Aaron did a cover with us of Walking on Sunshine for this American Psycho comic book compilation that we did. Work with John Feldman on a bunch of Ice Nine Kills stuff. And
Feldman, of course, the frontman for Goldfinger.
For Goldfinger.
Also multi-platinum producer.
Of course, and working on a new song for an upcoming Ice Nine Kills record, and it looks like El Jefe from NoFX might be
amazing
lending his shredding. So yeah, it's always been in my blood. The band started, of course, as just Ice Nine back in 2000, and for the first 4 or 5 years, we were a ska punk band. So
and of course, I've been in California many years now, but I was born and raised in Indianapolis. So of course I have to speak up for the Indianapolis Ice Nine.
Of course.
A power violence metal band that was pretty regional, but definitely a cool band, definitely some cool guys. So, I mean, there's only so many words in the English language. I always think about how once upon a time, the Police named themselves the Police because it's a word you see everywhere.
Right.
And now that's the last name you want. If you're gonna call your band Paris, you put a weird consonant in the middle so people can Google it.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, there's no way to know really until you get out there and start using it.
And that band they were from Indianapolis,
Yeah.
right? Before we released our first full-length album in 2006, it was called Last Chance to Make Amends. We had the artwork all done. It said Ice Nine, Last Chance to Make Amends. But I kept hearing that there was that other band from Indianapolis.
And they weren't really active by that point.
No, I think
but still, they did exist.
Right. And I think they had broken up, but I thought, this was really in the early stages of bands using the internet, mp3.com and punkrock.org. It was sort of the early stages of bands using that platform to promote. And I thought, what, we better, out of respect to them and out of hoping there'd be no confusion when people search our name, we added the Kills. And we had a shirt that said Ice Nine Kills that we were selling. And I thought, what, we don't want to lose the branding that we had developed over the last few years. So that's why we made this slight name change.
Worked out perfect for everyone. And also from Indiana, while I'm talking about some of my fellow Hoosier illusionists, Kurt Vonnegut.
Correct.
Great Kurt Vonnegut from Indiana, and of course, Ice Nine being a Kurt Vonnegut creation, no?
Of course, yeah. I have to give my sister Jocelyn credit for the name of the band. Right around, after that Goldfinger show in 2000, when we formed the band, we were, racking our brains for what should we call the group. And my sister, who's a lot smarter and more collegiate than I am, suggested Ice Nine. I said, oh, what is Ice Nine? And she explained Cat's Cradle. And I thought that would be a great band name, and we went with it. And we've been lucky enough to attend the Kurt Vonnegut Memorial Library, which actually is in Indianapolis.
Wow.
And
I've never been there.
You've never been
go.
there, and you got to get on this.
I've been to the James Dean Museum.
That's pretty good.
He's buried in
He's slightly more handsome than Kurt
little
Vonnegut,
bit.
but I like Kurt Vonnegut's writing a little bit better than
little better,
James Dean.
yeah.
And they even asked us for some Ice Nine Kills merchandise for the museum. They were doing a exhibit about Kurt's effect on pop culture, so we were very honored to loan some merchandise to them.
Do they have anything there about his scene in Back to School? Rodney Dangerfield?
They absolutely should. I was just talking about that the other day.
It's so great. For those who haven't seen it, right, like cut to Back to School right now. But I think Thornton Mellon gets an F on his paper about Kurt Vonnegut. And then it turns out he actually had hired Kurt Vonnegut to write the paper.
Right, and then
He doesn't know the first thing about Kurt
the professor eventually finds out that he cheated, and she says to him, and by the way, tell whoever wrote that paper that they don't know the first thing about Kurt Vonnegut. Back to School, great film, quick little tangent. Not a lot of people.
This is what we do here.
Yeah, not a lot of people know that, but if you go back and watch this fantastic Rodney Dangerfield film, the professor's house that they show in the movie is actually the same house they used in the original Halloween. It's the Doyle house.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which is right off Sunset on
The professor, the love interest.
Yeah,
professor.
the blonde professor. It's right off Sunset. It's on Orange Grove, and it looks almost identical to the way it looked in Back to School and Halloween.
And I always imagined all those locations were somewhere in New England. I don't think I even realized that Back to School was. I don't know if Back to School falls into the purview of horror's hallowed grounds, but
what's up there? The Rodney Dangerfield's son in that movie was also in Christine.
Yes, of course. And we can't forget Billy Zabka, the best 80s movie bully from Cobra Kai, and just one of the guys.
And also, to tie into Ice Nine, this is a crazy tangent we're going off on.
This is what we do.
But
people keep asking me what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, in Christine,
this is what we're going to talk about.
With the son of Thornton Mellon from Back to School, our guitarist Dan Sugarman, his uncle, Stu Charnas, who was a prominent character actor back in the 80s, was in Christine, and he was also in Friday the 13th Part 2, and just one of the guys.
And just one of the guys?
And just one of the guys.
Way.
He's the redheaded guy with what has all
with
the reptiles.
The iguanas.
Yeah.
How have I never discussed this with Dan Sugarman? Can we get Dan Sugarman?
We get Sugarman on the line. So Sugarman.
Amazing. That's a conversation that's long overdue then.
I could use more sugar in my coffee.
Some more sugar, man.
Just kidding.
So going back to this punk rock thing, not all that long ago, you get to perform with Goldfinger and our friend Mike Herrera of the great MXPX. And those kind of moments, like when you look at a track listing for Ice Nine and you go, there's Corpse Grinder and there, these great metal luminaries. Mm-hmm. But what a thrill for you when it's Real Big Fish or when it's, Mike Herrera. What are those moments like? Unbelievable,
man. In high school, those were the bands that inspired us to be a band. MXPX and Goldfinger and even Story of the Year, because one of the guys from Story of the Year plays in Goldfinger now. And we had been working with Feldman on some new Ink tracks a couple of weeks ago, and it went great. And I'm driving away from his house, and I get this text from John. He's like, "Hey, we're playing at the House of Blues in Anaheim, this Friday. Do you want to come up and sing a couple of songs with us?
And you're like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, let me check the schedule. And he was like, we're going to do Open Your Eyes, and we're going to do a cover of NoFX's Linoleum, which for, punk fans, pop punk fans especially, that's like the Bohemian Rhapsody of that era, right? So that was exciting. He's like, yeah, and if you could come over we're doing a rehearsal in 2 days, so, can you stop by? So went back to John's house, and I get in there, and not only is it, Goldfinger, it's, Charlie, the original guitarist, and John, but El Jefe from NoFX was there too. I had no idea they were going to bring him on stage to do Linoleum, and we practiced, and it was just like, man, am I really at a band practice right now with Goldfinger?
Yeah.
And got
That's
up.
almost even more insane than actually going on stage with them.
It was wild,
Being in
man.
that intimate setting of just like, here we are, just here with my peers.
It was very cool, and then the show was great, and got on stage and hopefully rocked it. It sounded good from all the videos I heard, and yeah, it's just one of those moments where it really is a full circle moment and something that's so surreal when people you look up to that influenced the way that you write music and the way that you think about song structure and aesthetic, respect you enough to want to have you on stage with them. So that's something I'll never forget.
Incredible. This is where it's great that we have multiple camera angles, because I don't know what that guy is, but.
Oh, thank you. That belonged to, I think, my driver, who mysteriously disappeared.
I believe, do we have an evidence bag somewhere on set? We
Do an evidence bag?
put that in? So you mentioned that show that was so seminal for you at the Palladium. Mm-hmm. And of course now Silver Screen Convention, started in a hotel, and
A La Quinta?
yeah,
Double tree.
it's somewhere uncomfortable, like the back of a Volkswagen. And then it
Fashionably male?
quickly blew up to where now it's down the street from the Palladium at the DCU. I mean, again, these kind of full circle moments. Because I know you're a bit of a workaholic. You're constantly creating and
I actually have to go because I got another meeting right now.
Exactly.
I don't wear a watch.
And it's, do you ever take a moment to just kind of go like, oh wow, I have this event now that I curate that is down the street from the Palladium?
Yeah, I try to drink those moments in anytime I can, and anytime I get sort of overwhelmed, because as you said, I do a lot of stuff, but I'm just so thankful to be able to do great stuff with great people like yourselves, and it's amazing. And on the convention topic, like we were talking about, working with my heroes from music and the punk rock stuff, equally as surreal as working with these actors and these filmmakers that made these movies that is equally influential to me as those bands. So to be at our own convention and to look over and see David Arquette and Skeet and Devin Sawa and people like Bill Moseley and Sean Cunningham, who
Doug Bradley.
the late great Tony Todd, the creators of movies and of like Friday the 13th and the original Michael Myers, Nick Castle, and modern Michael Myers like James Jude Corey. It's crazy. It really is. And I'm constantly like, I can't believe these people even know who the hell I am. It's an honor, it really is.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And that brings us nicely back, the early days of childhood. I know we've spoken before about how that old school, beautifully recreated by one of our favorite haunts here in California, Slashback Video.
Yes.
But that old school video store vibe of going in and just seeing the artwork as you would in a record store, and going like, what's that? And I want to see that. Let's elaborate on that a little bit. Can you tell me a bit about those old experiences and how you were first discovering some of these movies through some of this great iconic slasher artwork?
Absolutely. It all goes back to where I was raised, which is on the North Shore of Massachusetts. Sort of these three towns that are interconnected: Swampscott, Marblehead, and of course, historically famous or infamous Salem, Massachusetts. And I believe my first sort of video store experience came from going to the grocery store with my mom. In Massachusetts, or New England, I think, there's a chain called Stop and Shop. And within Stop and Shops, at least in that era, there was also a video store. This is before DVDs, all VHSs. And I would go shopping with my mom, and to kill time while she was perusing the produce section, I would go into the video store. And for whatever reason, it wasn't sort of the influence of my older sibling, Jocelyn, who, she doesn't really like horror movies at all, or a friend in the schoolyard. And remember, I'm like 6 or 7 years old. I was just immediately drawn to that horror aisle. And I would look at the cases of the VHS boxes, and Sleepaway Camp, and Creep Show, and Friday the 13th, that outline, the silhouette of the killer, Silent Night, Deadly Night. And then the one that grabbed me the most, and I didn't even know what it was. I had no sort of sense of which movie was like the most iconic. That box art for Halloween, just that pumpkin, the knife, and the sort of the shards kind of mimicking the knife on the pumpkin. And I was like, what is that? I want to see that. So I told my mom, what I got to rent this. What is Halloween?
And how old were you again here?
Six
Right.
or 7. And she explained to me, no, Spencer, we can't do this. But I was persistent. My mom and dad would always tell me, you're relentless, you won't shut up. So eventually they gave in, and they let me rent Halloween. So that was the first one I ever saw, and was just immediately taken by Michael Myers, and it sort of became a ritual with my mom and I to try to find a Michael Myers mask. At the time, so this is probably 1992 or 93, it's not like it is now, when you can go and, type in Google and find something on Etsy, or find, Trick or Treat Studios, or any of the big costumers, and find a Michael Myers mask. There was no good Michael
Couldn't even
Myers
find
mask.
a William Shatner mask.
No, you couldn't find anything.
Let alone.
So we would look for that mask, and eventually she let me see all those other. My dad and my mom were cool about me seeing some of these movies. And I even remember in a report card that I wish I still had. It was literally my kindergarten report card. The teacher said, she was kind of bad-mouthing me, saying that Spencer is a bit of a bad influence on the other kids. And I shit you not, there was a line in that says, he even claims to have seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it just became a lifelong obsession from there. And I think my parents thought, oh, he'll grow out of it. And meanwhile,
They're still waiting.
Yeah, 32 years later, we're here talking about it. And and then I think the next big moment for me, after renting every single slasher movie possible with my cousin Brandon, that would be kind of our ritual when we would be in Florida for the holiday break. We'd go to Blockbuster every night and find something new. Was when a movie came out called Scream, and so I would have been 11 at the time, and there was buzz on the beach. We were in Florida that this movie Scream is scarier than Halloween. I said, my 11-year-old said, "What? Are you what? We need."
But that's not possible.
Yeah, so we need to see that. So my mom and dad took my cousin Brandon and I to see Scream. And I think the only other horror movie in the theater I had seen was Army of Darkness. My dad took me to that. But this was the first real scary slasher movie that I would have seen in the theater. And I just remember sitting there, and as soon as the killer on the phone with Drew Barrymore in that infamous scene, he started talking about Michael Myers and Jason and Freddy Krueger. I had never heard anything like that in any horror movie, that sort of self-referential. I didn't even know what the term self-referential meant at the time. I turned to my cousin, I said, this is gonna be my favorite goddamn movie of all time. I cannot believe we're in the theater with this, big budget movie. To me, it was big budget.
And these characters are talking like we do.
Yeah, they're talking about these killers. And I just sat there in awe for, 90 minutes, just blown away. Every single thing about that movie just hit me. And the twist ending was just like something that...
Twist beginning with Drew Barrymore dying. And like now, you have movies like Scary Movie that kind of, made fun of it, and that mask is so prevalent, it doesn't have the same effect as it did. But in 1996, to me, when Ghostface, who wasn't even known as Ghostface at the time, would come on screen, I mean, my cousin and I were under the seats scared. So again, to bring it back to the convention, to now have people from Scream, I was just talking to Matt. To have an Ice Nine Kills sticker in a Scream movie.
Oh my God, I mean.
That's insane.
Absolutely insane. Yeah, and that all goes out to my boys, Radio Silence, Matt Bettinelli and Tyler and Chad. They directed Scream 5 and 6, and we happened to meet at...
Well, they're fans also. That's what's great about this generational stuff, right, is eventually fans are making the
it's
stuff
crazy. And I give all the credit for that to my buddy Dead Meat James and Chelsea, who invited me to their wedding, and I ended up sitting next to the Radio Silence guys, bonding with them. And long story short, they were like, you really love Scream so much, we can tell. If we do part 6, send me a poster, an Ice Nine Kills poster. It's like, oh, thanks, Matt. Like, that's really nice.
Right,
Never expecting to hear anything about it. And needless to say, we kept in touch about it. And they were like, you know what? Send us some Ice Nine Kills stuff. I knew part 6 was taking place in New York City. So I thought, okay, so maybe a clever way to tie in a poster, let's get my boy Mike Cortado, who designs all the Ice Nine Kills merchandise.
Shout out to our good friend Mike.
Of course. Let him design an Ice Nine Kills show flyer for something in New York, right? So I knew how much the Radio Silence guys loved Wes Craven Easter eggs because they're littered throughout 5. So I was like, you know what? Okay, Mike, when you make the flyer, make sure that the venue says Abe's Snake Pit. He's like, okay, what the hell does that mean? I said, Abe Snake was Wes Craven's porn directing alias back in the 70s. So he was like, that's awesome. So I sent Matt from Radio Silence the poster, and I said, and check out the venue name. And he goes, oh my God, Abe Snake, that's amazing. So I was excited that he was excited about it. And then a couple weeks later, he's like, dude, we like that reference so much on the poster. We want to name the bodega in the film Abe Snake Bodega. So if you watch part 6, that's the name of the bodega.
And by the way, and I'm not just saying this because it's relevant to what we're talking about, that bodega scene is the best part of the Scream film.
With the shotgun?
Just seeing Ghostface with a gun and not a knife, and in a bodega as opposed to familiar kind of settings we're used to. That was a neat,
it was absolutely
cool
great.
Visual, yeah.
Yeah. And so they were super nice about it. And when the film came out and they were doing press about it, a lot of journalists brought up that exact reference. They're like, come on, who gave you that? Whose idea was that? And they were just so nice to give me full credit on that. And there was like an article in Screen Rant about, Scream 6's most in Easter egg, find out about it. So it's just for me as someone who's so influenced by that franchise to have any, just a little thing to do with it.
And your lawyers are in touch with the Guild.
They
for
are.
Your screenwriting credit there.
It's still in litigation.
So, yeah. It's still ongoing. You mentioned your mom being with you in the grocery store during that pivotal moment where you see the Halloween box and your dad taking you to Army of Darkness, great Bruce Campbell. So your parents certainly must have been permissive in the sense that horror, for kids, teenagers even, there are a lot of parents who don't want that anywhere in the mix. And going as far back as the Satanic Panic and even further to a lot of the stuff, exploitation films in the 70s and even Hammer horror. There's all these areas of movies where they were very taboo. So what was the vibe in the Charnas household? Like you said, your sister's not really a fan, and obviously your mom wasn't gung-ho to show you Halloween when you're 6. But they were ultimately permissive. And it seems like you've turned out okay. So I'm just curious about
You
your
have to
thoughts
talk
on
to
that.
my therapist to get a verification on that.
She's coming in next.
Is she behind me?
Yeah.
All right. So what was the vibe, you mean, overall?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like your parents were pretty permissive to an extent, and it didn't ruin you.
Yeah, they were very cool about it. And after I saw Halloween, they told me this story about when they were pregnant with my sister Jocelyn, sometime in 1978. They went to see Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which came out in 78. And when they got to the theater, it turned out it was a double feature. And before Invasion of the Body Snatchers, there was a little movie that they'd never heard of called Halloween. So, imagine, in 78 where other than, films like Black Christmas, which I don't think they were really aware of or saw, or Texas Chainsaw, there had never really been anything like that, right? And they were so goddamn scared by Halloween. I guess my sister was, kicking in my mom's stomach the entire time. Invasion of the Body Snatchers came on. They're like, this is just like...
Yeah, it's totally tame.
Yeah, exactly. And they said even when they got back to their apartment in Salem, they were looking behind their shoulders to see if Michael Myers was there. So they weren't huge horror fans, but they definitely had an appreciation for it. And they saw how much I was sort of moved and in love with it. So they were always very cool and supportive about indulging in my strange and unusual interests.
And horror films are by nature boundary pushing and iconoclastic, and then you have punk music, which is, and then both also have these subcultures around them and that can populate whole conventions and festivals and kind of exist parallel to or beneath the mainstream culture. And then it's kind of, the third component of kind of the trinity of who you are, in my mind, is comedy. And comedy is another boundary-pushing, self-sustaining culture, and there's comedy nerds, and certainly now in this era, especially comedy's in this boom. Where did comedy come in? I know your dad has a great sense of humor. How did that get started for you?
Yeah, absolutely. My parents are both super funny. My sister has a great sense of humor, and like most people from my generation, I spent a lot of time watching HBO and Showtime and Cinemax, sometimes a little bit too late on Cinemax, after dark kind of stuff. I discovered movies like Police Academy and Naked Gun and Weekend at Bernie's and the whole Gutenberg collection. I celebrate the guy's entire catalog.
Indeed.
And I was just really enthralled and
the Zucker Brothers and that kind of like slapsticky parody,
Airplane,
the straight-faced, deadpan, ridiculous dialogue, and
Leslie Nielsen, I mean, as a god. And at the same time, getting into punk and getting into metal and getting into horror, I fell in love with those movies because I think, no matter who you are, there's nothing, they say laughter's the best medicine, and really when you're authentically laughing, I mean, is there a better feeling? And I became obsessed with those movies as well, and I think that's why movies like Scream, movies like Jason Lives, movies like American Psycho and Idle Hands and Evil Dead 2, that combination, the juxtaposition of gore, extreme gore and disturbing imagery with laughter, I think that's sort of the apex mountain of everything for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like for me personally, extreme sort of violence in horror films and comedies that sort of mines some of the darker parts of life and life's big questions and things that we all have to face, like mortality. And to me, it defangs a lot of that stuff. That's what's great about it, because in kind of indulging it in this relatively safe environment through this medium of art, you're exploring all those ideas in a way that isn't so terrifying. And I know you said to me before, as a kid, there was this idea of if you could kind of become the monster, then the monster isn't so scary. And just the more you inhabit it, and the more you understand, like, well, Halloween's a film.
Right.
It's got this magic to it, and there's this fantastical element, but there's also a really cool story about how they made it in 2 weeks or whatever, and it was, and shot on this block in Pasadena, and this was, and and the guy who directed it also did the music, and when you start getting into that side of it, it also becomes comfortable, and now it's like Michael Myers is like an old friend of ours.
Yeah, absolutely, and you mentioned Michael Myers. Nick Castle played him in the original, right? And that was all, Michael Myers, that image of him, at the top of the stairs with the butcher knife, or especially
standing from the hedge.
The hedge, and to me,
I believe there's an Easter egg of that in one of your graphic novels.
Of course there is, by the brilliant Ryan Downey.
Oh, did I write that?
But that image of where you see Michael Myers in the background of part one, and Jamie Lee Curtis thinks she's defeated him, right? And he just sits up, like glides up and comes towards her. That image, still is scary to me. But
and it became a trope, but you have to remember in the context, like, that wasn't a trope. That wasn't something you saw happen in every horror movie.
Right, and also there are at least audio recordings, you could find it on YouTube, of an audience seeing Halloween in 1978, and you hear people just screaming at that part.
At Jamie Lee Curtis. Behind
you.
Yeah.
But now to come full circle and be friends with Nick Castle, who played Michael Myers, he's like my grandfather, basically.
Right.
So we did a con a couple weeks ago. We have the same booking agent for convention. Shout out Sean Clark.
Horror's Hallowed Grounds.
Of course, him and.
After you're done liking and subscribing here, go watch Horror's Hallowed Grounds.
We had dinner every night that we were at this convention, Nick Cass and I, and then we were the only two people going back to LA from this convention in Missouri. So Michael Myers and I were together the entire day, just going through the airport. Do you have your bags? Are you checking your bags, Nick? Getting drinks, at the bar before a flight, and him giving me a ride home with his wife so that my girlfriend didn't have to drive all the way to LA. It's just like, those kind of moments that I'm like, is this really happening?
Yeah. So getting back to this idea of young Spencer, horror, comedy, all this stuff, coming together, punk rock. Did you ever have a sense that, because your parents were very generous and very permissive and supportive of your interest, did you ever have a sense that this was stuff that's frowned upon or discouraged, by kind of the mainstream or sort of the powers that be? Like, you're not supposed to like horror movies. You're not supposed to. I mean, the kindergarten teacher, of course.
Yeah, I don't think I had too much of a sense of that super early on, but I think inherently the music that I listened to and the movies that I liked, I got the feeling that it was a bit of a forbidden fruit, especially for someone as young as I was. I think I saw my friends and I, we always seemed to be a little bit older souls. I was always kind of attracted to those kind of people. My friend Jamie and I, we went to like a very conservative kind of prep school in Marblehead, and we both had older siblings. So like, we watched MTV when we were probably the only ones in our class watching it. And that's a reason why when there was like a arts festival or Battle of the Bands at school, and we're 10 years old, the other bands were playing, maybe some Beatles tunes or something like that. And we were up there 10 or 11, playing Dive by Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Silverchair songs. But yeah, I think we definitely ruffled some feathers at that school, but they were always, supportive. I learned how to play guitar at this specific school.
Amazing.
Shout out to Fred Shepard, who taught me how to play guitar.
Thank you, Fred. We appreciate that.
Great guy.
And it was just a few years back, when you think about some of the stigma and taboo that actually still exists in some places about this kind of art. You guys were kind of famously banned from the House of Blues in Orlando.
Yes.
Right? And this might be a little inside baseball, but I think a lot of people maybe don't know that the House of Blues in Orlando is on Disneyland property.
Unfortunately.
And the Anaheim House of Blues was at one time. I think, now it's moved. I don't think it's technically part of Disneyland. But there's always been this kind of, it's a rule, but it's not very clearly defined, which is what's always kind of frustrated me about it, where certain bands can't perform at the House of Blues when they're on Disney property.
Yeah.
And as I understood it, and this is going back like 15, almost 20 years ago, booking agents would have to present bands for approval to be pre-approved. And if you had, a tour package that was like 5 or 6 bands, it might even just be one of the bands that they say no to.
That's correct.
And I personally have never had an issue with any venue saying, we don't want this band for whatever reason. If that's their venue and that's their right to say we don't want you, and why would you want to play somewhere that doesn't want you, right?
Yeah.
Go play down the street. That's the free market, right?
Right.
But what was frustrating about that, as I understood it then, and I presume when it was happening to Ice Nine Kills, they don't give you a list. It's not like, here's the criteria of things that you can and can't do here. It was just sort of like a vibe.
Yeah.
And they would just tell you kind of without explanation,
Yeah.
you're not on the list. And one example, this was probably about 2007 maybe, the band I'm quite close with and have worked with a lot, called Demon Hunter, was doing a tour, and it was a package tour. They had like 4 or 5 bands on the undercard. And we were told that this band called The Famine, who was like the first of 5 band opening the tour every night, couldn't play, but everybody else could.
Yeah.
And by the way, this was a Christian metal tour. They were all Christian bands.
Right.
But it was just like, there was no explanation.
Yeah.
It was like, I guess someone looked at the band name and The Famine was off the list. So yeah, tell me your war story about that. We haven't actually talked about it a whole lot, but I do remember it happening and kind of your appropriately comedic response to it. But how did that go down? How did you first hear about it? Was there any forewarning? Was there any explanation in your case? Did they tell you why?
Yeah, well, to tie it back to the film industry, like what you were saying about sort of no explanation, no real guidelines, it kind of reminds me of the MPAA.
Yes.
Which especially in
you got to cut it down to get an R. Well, what do we got to cut? Well, you just got to fix it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like in the 80s and the 90s and famously, like, to tie it back to Scream, I guess Wes Craven went back to the MPAA like 16 times and he couldn't get an R rating until Bob Weinstein called up and told Wes Craven, I got you an R. And Wes Craven said, that's great. What did you do? I convinced him it was a comedy. So then movies went on to realize when you submit a movie first to the MPAA, do go far beyond what you want and then cut back.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to the Disney story. I believe we were on tour with, I think it was Falling in Reverse. And I got a call maybe a week before the tour from our booking agent, Eric Powell, and he said, hey, Spencer, I got some good news and bad. I was like, oh, okay. Well, good news is you have an extra off date, because I know you like off dates. Singers, we like off dates for our voice.
Vocal rest, as they
Vocal
call it.
rest. He said, but bad news is you can't play the Orlando date. I was like, what do you mean? Is the show's canceled? He's like, no, your band just can't play. And basically, I guess Disney found us to be too evil for children, was the quote that I was told.
Was that a quote?
I think that's either a quote or something I just made up.
Where does that even come from, right? Like, who says that?
I think.
How does it get to you?
I think what it is, if you look at the list of bands that are banned, which I don't really know if it makes sense for the Famine. Is that what you said the name of that band was? But Cannibal Corpse, Every Time I Die.
It seems like it's band names.
Yeah, if you have something with kill or die or something that sounds scary, I think that actually might just raise the flag, and then they kind of look into your music and your aesthetic and the song titles, which Cannibal Corpse, you know, effed with a knife. It's a bit of a red flag. Even though Goofy, you know, has done some snuff films, but that's a different documentary. And
certainly now that Mickey's in the public domain,
of course,
who knows what he's going to get up to.
And Minnie, of course. So yeah, we couldn't play that show, and I thought it would be fun to poke fun at this kind of ridiculous spanning. So Mike Cortada and I dreamt up a
Florida resident Mike Cortada,
of course.
Yeah,
proximity to Disney is very, very, very close. And we thought it would be fun to release a merchandise line called Too Evil for Children, which depicts, you know, Mickey as Freddy Krueger, where screams come true, Goofy as Leatherface.
And it's parody, which is, in terms of my understanding of copyright law.
Well, that's what I told the judge. So yeah, it turned out to be one of our most successful merchandise drops, and we get a lot of photos, people tagging us in, of them wearing the Disney Inc. merchandise at the park. And we also, you know, through the grapevine have been told that character actors, you know, the people that dress like Goofy or Mickey,
cast members, as they call them.
Cast members have been instructed to not pose in photos with anyone with Ice Nine Kills merchandise.
As a fan of both Disneyland and Ice Nine Kills, this whole thing is fascinating and fun for me.
It's fun.
Worked out great for everyone.
Yeah, it was like one of those things that was a blessing in disguise. And thank you, Walt.
I guess it is the names that get flagged, because I do remember hearing a story that there was a show that was the band that Necromantics and Horror Pops were playing together. Mm-hmm. And Kim Necroman is in both of those bands. They were on the same label, very similar genre, both in the psychobilly realm. And Horror Pops was allowed to play, and Necromantics were not. And again, it's just sort of like, well, I guess the name? And I think, as you said, but again, it would be a different situation if they were to tell the music industry, here's what's not allowed.
Yeah.
You know, then you know ahead of time.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's their park. I guess they could do whatever they want, but...
And you made some lemonade out of those lemons.
I tried.
Sure. Pretty killer.
Yeah.
Pretty killer. Which also makes me think something I wanted to talk to you about also. Some of these videos that you're doing, first of all, very cinematic music videos, oftentimes homages to different films that you love that the songs tie into. You also have this whole extended universe of Ink lore that plays out as a storyline throughout just about everything that you do. What are the challenges? I mean, something like a work of art. Terrifier is known, if Terrifier is known for anything, aside from the killer being a clown, it's how extreme it is.
Yes.
And so if you're gonna do a video and you're gonna have David Howard Thornton, the actual Art the Clown, in the video, and things are gonna get crazy, and you know, there might be an infant in the video somewhere. Like, I mean, everything's on YouTube now. Everything's, you know, social media and shared and all of that. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges? How far can you go? What do you do with the stuff that you can't show?
Yeah.
You know, how do you handle all that?
Yeah, the censorship thing, especially with YouTube, is a big bummer, because if you do anything that's somewhat subversive or extremely violent, you get censored and sort of, you know, the video like we did for a work of art, and as you said, Terrifier, which is, in my opinion, one of the greatest slasher franchises of all time. And we were so lucky to be able to be involved in it, to make the official video. It gets extremely restricted. So it kind of takes it out of being in the algorithms. It doesn't show up on certain searches. If you're trying to search for that particular video, you have to prove you're 18. So the YouTube has sort of become the new MPAA.
And are there a set of restrictions or things that you get where they're like, hey, you know, or...
I think it's still a little bit like we were saying, like that sort of vague thing. Certainly, killing an infant, I believe, is
probably on their list
in the bylaws. But we've done, you know, certain things like showing everything except those parts where you put like a censored bar over. But yeah, it's really difficult to be able to express what we want and not have it restricted. But with Terrifier, you know, this is one of the goriest films of all time. I mean, to the point where when I was at the premiere, Tom Savini was sitting next to me, who's, you know, a special effects guru. You know, he was considered and called for many years the Sultan of splatter. He said, Terrifier makes my Dawn of the Dead look like Bambi. So that kind of...
Yeah, he's not wrong.
Yeah. So with that particular video, we just had to let it all hang out. We wouldn't care if we're restricted. The video still has gotten millions of views, but obviously would be a lot more if it wasn't restricted. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the most fun, entertaining videos I've ever had the pleasure of making. And, you know, having Chris Nelson, one of the greatest special effects makeup guys of our day, do the effects. You know, this is the guy that did, you know, the Kill Bill movies, and it was cool. One of the best kills in our video was when the guy gets completely chopped in half, which is straight out of Kill Bill, and it's like, it's inspired by that kill, and we have the guy who did it. So yeah, that was.
And it's his chance to do it differently and do it a little, you know.
Yeah.
Having had time to think about it, and yeah, I mean, to me, Terrifier brings up a really important point about art that I often think about, which is
the clown.
Art, and I swear I didn't do that on purpose. That, you know, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool horror person. I have horror in my blood. Elm Street is one of my top 5 films of all time. You know, Carnival of Souls, you know, all kinds of eras of horror. I celebrate the whole catalog, and you know, you can often find me. You can always find me at the Silver Scream Con. I say all of that as a preamble because the Terrifier films make me uncomfortable. I went to Terrifier 3's premiere, and just sitting there, especially the whole opening sequence to Terrifier 3, I was uncomfortable. I'd be hard pressed to say that I enjoyed it, right?
But you have kids.
Exactly. And, you know, I respect it. I'm glad that we live in a culture where it can be made and enjoyed. And I always think about this like, you know, Anthony Jeselnik's one of my favorite comedians, and I've seen him multiple times. I've seen him probably a dozen times. And occasionally he'll wade into territory that makes me personally a little uncomfortable. And I always kind of check myself and go like, I can't laugh at 9 out of 10 of his jokes and then cross my arms and harumph at the 10th one that just happens to hit me where I'm at. And I think that that's what's important about things like the Terrifier franchise is like, we should be able to push boundaries where even like a horror person is a little horrified in the wrong way, you know, at certain sequences. Are there things like that for you? I mean, as immersed as you are in horror and comedy and metal and punk, are there still things that even for you as an adult where you're kind of like, oh, that kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I think when I went to the Terrifier 3 premiere, there were some of those kills. One in particular with the rats.
Yeah.
This woman gets this big, like, cylindrical tube shoved down her throat, and then Art the Clown puts rats in the tube and then uses a blowtorch so that the rats go into her throat, and then
cuts her throat open so the rats can come out.
Yeah, I'm not a sick person, I swear. That was
I'm a vegetarian, by the way.
Yeah, that for me, I was like, oh my God, like I feel disgusting. And I think I told Damien that, who created and wrote and does the effects, and he was like, thank you. Yeah.
That's what he's like.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished.
Because honestly, I think that if you can get under someone's skin that likes this stuff, I think that's exactly what he was aiming for, and I really respect it because I think that it's important, whether it's in comedy or music or horror, it's important to keep pushing the boundaries, and I don't know, I back it, and I also, to tie it back into our video for Terrifier Work of Art, there is a scene where a woman is delivering her baby, and Art the Clown approaches the EMTs, you know, slits their throat, as one does. And then Art,
In the middle of an Ice Nine Kills concert.
of course, and then Art proceeds to be, OBGYN, so to speak. And it's a pretty intense scene. And everyone I showed the video to, from my father to our management to everyone I showed it to prior to its release said, I like it, but the pregnancy scene, it just goes on a little too long. And the sound design is a little too crushing and disgusting. That's my only comment. So I said, oh, thanks. So I went back to our editor and to the sound design guy. I said, add 10 seconds and turn up all of those effects a few decibels.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Damien, the creator of the Terrifier franchise, had a note for the video.
Yes.
A suggestion, and it was?
It was, well, originally, if you've seen the video, Art delivers the baby, and then you see the lovely Catherine Corcoran dead
Shout
on.
out to Catherine. We love Catherine around these
Love
parts.
Catherine. And you see her dead with the umbilical cord tied around her neck, sort of an off-screen death. But my original idea, I don't know, can I say anything on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
My original
Fucking A.
Fucking A, man. My original idea for that kill was that Art delivers the baby. It's obviously attached to an umbilical cord. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, I
but
believe that's part of the
I think
process.
that's part. I went to Yale, but I didn't really study medicine. And I was going to have Art look up and see one of those really big industrial ceiling fans, those ones that are really loud and big. And I was going to have Art the Clown throw the baby up into the fan. It was going to get entangled in the fan, and the baby was going to be swinging around the concert venue by the umbilical cord. We were going to sort of do a GoPro kind of shot from the perspective of the baby, right? And the ceiling fan
It's been done so many times.
It's been done. It's old hat. And you were going to see that the umbilical cord is getting tangled up. And then Art the Clown was going to prance over to Catherine, who was still alive, tie a noose around her neck, and then she was going to travel up and then be completely chopped to pieces by the fan. And I mentioned that to the Terrifier guys, and they loved the idea, but they said I might be going a little too far. And also Chris Nelson was like, you got an extra $1 million to do that?
There's also that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was sort of I got the idea of the ceiling fan. There's a great scene in Idle Hands where there's something similar to that in terms of it.
I love, by the way, that you made the Terrifier people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And taste their own medicine.
But Damien's such a brilliant guy. He said, my one note is, because you don't really see what happens with the baby, it kind of gets thrown over to the bartender. And he said, when everyone's dead and the band's been shot with the Gatling gun and Art leaves the venue, throws down the gun, just put the sound of the baby crying so the audience knows that it's still alive.
The baby lives.
Yeah, so
That's also a mind who thinks of sequels.
yeah, exactly. So it was a great note, and I was so glad in the after movie, because you pull back from the video and it didn't really happen. Where the band is in a record label's office with Terry Kaiser, Weekend at Bernie's.
Another full circle moment.
Another full circle moment. One of my favorite comedic actors and actors in general. And then part of the story is that the record executive says, Damien Leone, that Terrifier director, he won't stop calling. So the fact that we were able to get Damien and the producer Phil, both wonderful people that are responsible for that franchise, to play themselves, telling us, they can't release that video or they're going to get us a nice pair of cement clown shoes.
So I want to ask you, and this is a question I'm sure you get, meet and greets that you do and at the photo ops you do, because you are also, Ice Nine has created a situation where now you're a horror person that does these conventions, just like a Skeet, where you're showing up there and signing photos and taking pictures. I'm sure you get this a lot, so to kind of plant the flag here for a lot of people to be able to see, what kind of advice do you have for not just someone who's trying to succeed in a band or get a record deal or that kind of stuff, but you've really built this universe, this Inkverse, with all of this lore and the image and the all the different mediums where you tell stories, the graphic novels and music videos and short films and all kinds of things that I know are in the works even as we're recording this that are forthcoming. What kind of advice do you have about people who feel like maybe they can't express who they are, they can't get the things out of themselves that they need to let out? What do you say to them?
Yeah. I've been doing this for, God, since 2000, really. So 25 years. And I think what I've learned over that course of time, and when the band started to really kind of take that turn of becoming a successful entity where, hey, this can be my job and I can make a living from it, was when I stopped worrying about what was trendy. I think back in the day when the band started, we were too concerned about, this kind of label is hot right now, so we should sound more like band X, or is this breakdown heavy enough because, this band is exploding. And I think as soon as we stopped worrying about what everyone else was doing and just did what I love and what's authentic to me, which is the punk inspiration, the metal inspiration, Broadway influences from shows like Phantom and Les Mis, and then incorporating, bringing in my other love, which was horror, and kind of making a sort of a melting pot of all those things, and again, just not really caring about what was popular at the time. That's when we started to see success. And that combined with believing in yourself and having a do-it-yourself kind of mentality, not waiting around for the phone to call from a record label, and just going out there and doing it and hustling and not being afraid to put in the work. Before we played concerts and tours like the Warped Tour, we were out there breaking into the tour with fake-made laminates and selling CDs to anyone who had a shirt of a band that we thought was comparable to us. So yeah, you got to believe in yourself and be ready for a lot of rejection. But again, it's like with Metallica, with Wes Craven.
I'm sorry,
Metallica.
Okay.
Small band from the Bay Area. Not sure if you've heard of them.
The Danish drummer, right?
Exactly. But I always go back to when you're discouraged about whatever business you're in, you think about that when Metallica started, no label would want to sign them because they were too metal for the punk kids.
Zero commercial appeal.
Right. And too punk for the metal kids. They're writing these
And they weren't pretty like the hair metal bands in LA at the time.
Right. I think the first label that signed them was Megaforce, right? Which was a very small label. And we all saw what happened with Metallica. And then you think about Wes Craven. When he was sort of down and out, he had this idea for this film where a killer, kills people in their dreams. And he brought it to every major studio, Paramount, Universal, all the big dogs, and they all told Wes, it's an interesting script, but no one's interested in movies about dreams. So, this very small company at the time called New Line Cinema took a chance on Wes, and I think we all saw what happened there.
The house that Freddie built.
That's correct.
Went on to win multiple Oscars for The Lord of the Rings.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, it all started there. A little newspaper article, I think, that Wes Craven read right about.
Right.
Maybe a dream killer. Well, Spencer, thank you so much for sitting down with me for this. No pun intended, but a dream guest. And here you are, so thank you.
Thank you. Always great to talk to you.